Welcome to Latchkey Legends. I am your host, Santanu Rahman. Today, my guest is Karen Browning, a fellow Gen Xer. Welcome, Karen.
Thanks, Santanu. Good to be here.
Yeah, so the whole point of this podcast is to talk about Generation X. In the city of Austin, we classify senior programs as Varsity Generation. How the city defines it is age 50 and up. I'm 50.
Hey,
I'm in my 50s.
yeah, same.
I'm past my 50.
Same.
So the thing is that a lot of the programming tends to revolve around 60 and up. And so I, being a Gen Xer, thought it would be a good idea to just hear from and chat with my fellow Gen Xers. So we see the world maybe a little differently than everyone else.
For sure.
You know, and we have a little bit of a different, I guess, cultural upbringing. What we've experienced, and we've navigated the switch from analog to digital in our communications. And so we are pretty proficient at being able to live in both worlds.
Yeah.
So right now, many of us are parents. Some are not.
Right.
You know.
Right.
But I wanted to just start off in the digital realm.
Oh,
so
yeah.
What is your relationship like with our technology? Are you completely addicted to it? Are you making the balance and your kids with it? What's the story?
It's a huge topic. So I work in tech. So does my husband. My husband, Ralph, is a web designer. He owns his own online digital agency. So obviously he's online all the time. Mm-hmm. And then I'm back at the university after being away for 25 years. I work for UT on a technology project. So I'm constantly obviously online too, and my job is to learn the technology and teach it. And then we have phones, you know, all of the things, right? And like my husband makes electronic music. Mm-hmm. It's just all wrapped up in our life. We have a 13-year-old in 7th grade and a 10-year-old in 5th grade. 13-year-old got the phone, you know, before 6th grade started, so we could stay in touch. And our younger does not have his own phone yet. He uses devices at home. Mm-hmm. Constant struggles. My kids and my husband are in upstate New York for spring break this week, visiting his family, and we just had a big blow-up discussion about homework versus digital fun, you know, video game time, you know, right before the break. And I'm on a thread with all these close friends of mine. Same thing. Like, it's funny how very similar conversations are happening across the board at like these 6 households of these women on this thread with me, you know, and we all have kids similar middle school, high school age. It's a really hard struggle.
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
Mean, I don't know about you, Karen, but back in the days, in the 80s, I used to watch TV for hours.
I did, a lot.
So I'm trying to not be a hypocrite about this.
Totally.
You know, but at the same time, like, we did go outside and we did interact with others. We did experience the world, and we watched hours and hours and hours of television.
And I think a big difference that, like, I don't know how many, you know, parents our generation think about it, but we did watch TV for hours, but then, like, the cartoons ended and the news came on, right? There were hard stops. Mm-hmm. The video games we played, there were levels, there was a hard stop. They weren't endless. Minecraft is endless open world. Right. All these games my kids play, endless open world, or new mods added constantly, right? We didn't experience that. So there was you know, I mastered the little table Miss Pac-Man that I had, you know, in 3rd grade, and then that was it. And I was outside playing with my friends again, like, you know. And so I wish for our kids there was more of that, like, hard stop and like division. And so that's part of the conversation we're having, is like navigating that and like not blaming them for it. Yeah. Like getting frustrated for sure, but not blaming them for it, but trying to have these conversations of like, how can you find that hard stop for yourself and extract yourself from that and go on to the next thing.
Right. And that's a, you know, we also have 2 teenagers, and that's also an issue. It's the unfortunate leverage tool we have to get them to do things that they might not want to do.
Yeah. And that's where we're getting to. I actually had the thought, because my 7th grader is well, you know him, but like he's extremely self-directed in some ways. And in others, he things he doesn't want to do. Right. He needs a lot more guidance. And so we talked about the screen time before he left for break, because he had some overdue assignments he wasn't, paying attention to. And so we've talked about like creating a login on his laptop that all the games are locked behind, where he can only log in with the login that he uses regularly to get into schoolwork. Right. And then we just talked about this is one strategy we're thinking through, but different strategies to kind of keep that out of his reach. Like he wants this. He wants this intervention and help. Or physically take the laptop away from him for the temptation. So we're trying to navigate that and find those ways of helping him focus on the things he needs to get done and get it done, and then do the fun stuff.
Totally. The word that I've come across a lot, and it's a very fun and funny word, is adulting. And I grew up with so much involvement with arts and music and self-expression. I was not really the jock type, it was all performance arts and music for me. And the idea of adulting just never crossed my mind in those areas. I never had this thing in my head where it's like, okay, well, one day I will get a regular 9-to-5 job, and I will have a home and a car, and I will have a wife and kids, and and do all that stuff. I didn't think I was gonna do all that. Did you always know you were gonna go this path?
I mean, to be really real, like being an 80s kid, I'm shocked that I lived to be 50. And not because I lived so hard, I wasn't the really hardcore partying type, but the whole nuclear war threat and all of those things. I honestly didn't think our generation would get to see this age, And so the fact that it's funny, when I got married, when I got engaged to my husband and we were planning our wedding, we realized he had way more visions of what his wedding would look like than I did, because I never thought I would be that old. I just never I never envisioned it for that reason. I just kind of grew up under the cloud of nuclear threat and that whole 80s Terminator and all those 80s movies, and it was a shock when I turned 25, and then each milestone. So yes and no. Definitely. I thought went back and forth about whether I would have kids and what kind of work I would do and that kind of thing. I mean, what I do now, I never would have dreamed that I had. I didn't even know it was a thing, and it wasn't until 25 years ago, right? Exactly. It's hard, and being a latchkey kid, I just spent a lot of time alone in my imagination and roaming the neighborhood, playing with friends. I don't know. I was also a military kid, so I lived far from extended family. We didn't have that baked in community that in my head everybody else had. Everybody else had the grandma who would watch them and the cousins at school with them and that big family, which I know it's not true. Not everybody had that, but in my head, being that, that kid who grew up far away from that, I just imagine everybody else had that. So I think
And you grew up in Florida.
I grew up in Florida, mostly,
And how would you compare that to living in Texas and your kids growing up in Texas? Is it a much different experience?
What's different is that, and my husband had sort of a more similar experience to what my kids are having. My kids don't really remember living in a different house than the one they live in now. They've known the neighbor kids that on our block that we're really close to. We all were in a pod, and COVID, we've all gone to the same elementary school. Now they're all entering different middle schools. I didn't have that as a kid. I was moving every 2 to 3 years. So I feel like that's more than geography, more than the cities that we lived in and that kind of thing. I feel like that's wildly different for both of them. My husband and my kids are different from me, because it was me and my sister, and the friends we made, we kind of started to realize we're going to move away from them. We're going to move away from them. So by the time my family quit moving around, when I hit middle school, I went to a magnet 7 to 12 middle school or middle high school in Jacksonville, Florida. I still am friends with 12 of those 12 of those friends,
Wow.
that we've been friends since we were like 12, 13, 15. Because I think once I finally found that community, I hung on to it, and then same like, adding your wife, Nisha, when I got here, I've got that like tight knit, like old friend community. And I think a lot of it was that childhood of feeling like, latchkey kid, parents both working, alone a lot, and just far from family, and just that feeling that void of community. And so I think I started like building it on my own. And my kids take it for granted. They've had the same neighbors, not literally their whole life, but practically from what they can remember. They got this experience, this rich experience of like going to this incredible elementary school that had a wonderful baked in community that they just like, take for granted. And like, Austin community, I think something that drove me back to Austin, I lived here in the late 90s, early 2000s. I went away for 10 years and then came back. And one of the biggest things, you and I've talked about this a lot, is community. That's what drew me back. The people I knew, but also that the music community, the film community, the arts community. There's just like community is important in Austin. And so I think that was something that drew me back here.
And I think Austin is unique for that. Then that's Austin.
In some ways,
I don't know if it still does, but it used to sort of be this almost, for lack of a better word, this refuge for people who felt out of place in their respective Texas towns.
I still talk to people who, I moved here 30 years ago from Dallas and never looked back, right? Like this was where I fit in and I didn't fit in up there, right? Or wherever.
Right.
Fill in the blank, right? Wisconsin or Chicago.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a few of these films like Terminator and things like that. I wanted to ask you about this because I find this really fascinating. You did a lot of perhaps academic work around dystopian films. Can you please talk about that? Because this is really fascinating, and sometimes like I'm looking at what we're going through culturally, societally, and it's like some of this sci-fi stuff is turning real.
Well, what I studied, so I did my master's degree in American Studies here at UT Austin. And what I decided to write my thesis on, reflecting back on my childhood, was apocalyptic films. Huge Buffy fan, loved Buffy the Vampire Slayer. There's just a thread. Totally. So good. There's just a thread through my life of like things I was drawn to. And I just really loved these apocalyptic films. And not because I'm like morbid and want to think about the end of the world, but just like, what do they say about us? What are we processing in these films? And I think a lot of it is like cultural moments. Like it's like what we're going through now, what we were going through in the 50s. A lot of the apocalyptic films in the 50s that came out were people processing World War II and the Holocaust and just all of that, like, massive upheaval and disruption in culture and society. They were processing it through these like giant monster movies and like horror movies and things. And 80s, it's a big disruption, of like tech, right? Like Terminator is like as clear as day now if we look at it, right? You're like, oh, people are afraid that machines are going to take over. Oh, well, look at where we're at now. We feel like they are, right? So I think we'll see some of that coming in the coming years, as we process this moment.
I almost feel like did these writers of these scripts know something we didn't, or did they have this kind of insight into the human condition and humanity and where things would lead up? Like, do you think that they had this kind of foresight? I
mean, I think with James Cameron, there is some of that. Like, he just, I think he's a very, like, forward-thinking. I mean, say all you want about him. He's definitely has his flaws, but like I think he's definitely a forward-thinking. Like he's jumping ahead and looking right, and like trying to like, okay, if you follow this path, what's going to happen, right? I don't know if that's true for all of them, but And for some, it also just provides like Buffy, for example, right? Like you put all these characters in this dire worst-case scenario situation, and it gives you this great, playground to like. See all these like, cultural criticisms you can make and like, characters and things. So there's just something very rich about that, like, quote unquote, end of the world, like, like feeling that just put everyone in this dire situation. What happens, I never watched Lost, but that's one that probably is similar, right? Like, Lost. Like dire situations like that. And I just find it fascinating. No, it's really, I mean, again, like just some of these things like, oh my God, this literally happened in this film. I'm always I just love the connection of
art and society, and
Yes.
what is happening, what has been expressed in art, and what is currently the moment of culture and society at this time. What, on a lighter note, what were some of your kind of comfort art of music, films, and such growing up?
So I grew up with a mom who adores music, still to this day. I find it so cute that my 70, I forget how old my mom is now, but 76, we'll say, year old mom sits and watches music videos on YouTube. And that's her way to pass an afternoon. Nice. She just loves music and loves exploring music still. Nice. So we grew up with a record player and tons of records, at our disposal, and just, listening to the radio, just listening to, my dad was very much into country, and and when my dad was drafted in 1968 and chose the Navy instead of the Army, because that's what his father and uncles did in World War II. Okay. So we have this, my sister and I for years had this case of cassettes that all the guys in the Navy had recorded for each other of all this rock music. And my dad gave it to us at one point when we were middle school, high school. And we're like, oh my God, this is great. All this old 60s, early, amazing rock music. And we're like, I didn't think my dad ever listened to anything but country. Oh, wow. But yeah, my sister, my mom, and I, we all just always love exploring music, pretty wide-ranging tastes in music. And coming back full circle to community, where I grew up in Jacksonville, there was this incredible all-ages club called the Einstein A-Go-Go. And I think it opened when I was in 6th or 7th grade, and I started going in 9th grade. They had bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and all of the up and coming 80s alternative, 90s alternative grunge. These women who ran it, their dad ran a record store when they were growing up, and then they opened this club, so they knew music, and they could tell. They just had a sense for it. Speaking of future jumping, they could just see the future of music. So they booked all these incredible bands, and it was this tiny little club out by the beach in Jacksonville. And again, the people who didn't fit in, it was always the freaks and geeks who went there. Jacksonville is it's a military town. It's a conservative town. It was a very you fit in or you didn't kind of town, right? And so, I went to this nerd school and we felt like we didn't fit in. So this place, Einstein's, was our place where we fit in. Right. I'm reading more now about this idea of the third space. Yeah. Yes. And so I really want to write about this topic for Einstein's. It was our third space. It was our fellowship hall or our church, or what these other spaces were for previous generations. That was our third space, and it was so rich. You could go for $5, a night, and no alcohol. It was all these 90s smart drinks and sodas, and there was the club where there was either a DJ dancing happening or bands. There was a lounge area. And then there was a little attached, this is so 90s, but there was a little thrift store / record store, right? So it just felt like home. It was our living room. It was I met my friends there all the time on weekends and for shows, and just saw all these incredible bands, and I don't even know what else to say about it. But it was it was 90s, 80s alternative, but it was also they would just bring in all these wildly different bands. And so it just kind of really broadened I started with 10,000 Maniacs and ended up on I don't know, Bad Brains. You know what I mean? It just, I was oh yeah, that's great too.
Well, the concept of the third space was something we've always had growing up as Gen Xers. We see increasingly less of that.
Exactly.
And that is sort of what I'm trying to do over here for our generation. But would our generation really respond to a third space anymore?
Yeah.
We've become so kind of isolated in some ways, I feel.
Mm-hmm. And our kids. I constantly wonder about that. Yeah.
Where could we go with? Would it have to be something like that, an all ages thing, where it would have to be family,
right?
Or could it be something separate for us?
Yeah, and I don't know. I have this group of women that I meet up with once a month at the Butterfly Bar, and that's sort of our third space. But it's just us, and it's just once a month, right? And it doesn't feel like enough. We definitely want something that's a little bit richer, a little bit more. like a little bit more baked into our lives.
Right.
So I don't know if I know the answer, but I definitely have been putting my finger on that lately, that we need that. And I think the device thing, the electronics things with the kids is part of that. Yeah. And like it's kind of the yin and yang of the same problem, right? Like they both fit together. The kids are attracted to the devices because they don't have the third space to go to. And like, you know, they don't seek out the third spaces because they have the devices. And it's just...
Yeah. And so because of that, I am noticing this, I don't want to say inability, but sort of reduced ability to be able to engage and socially interact and just walk up to someone and just say hi, make friends just randomly. I see less of that. And I wonder if there's something we Xers could do to maybe help change that. I don't know, a lot of us are introverts.
Well, and I think, you know, again, you and I have talked about this a lot. We're the sandwich generation right now, right? So we need that space to ourselves, but where do we find it? Like physically and temporally. Like I love the idea of it, but when would it fit in? You know, and that kind of thing. It's I'm not like physically caring for my mom right now. She's in Florida. My sister's the closer one, but like as she's aging, it's constantly on my mind. And like the caring for the older generation. My husband's parents are in their 80s in upstate New York. These things are constantly weighing on us and on our minds, and still very actively parenting younger children.
Absolutely.
And so that time for ourselves, it's so like limited. I'm either like trying to do career development, or I'm just trying to rest, or like catch up on the house things. And so like even with community being so important to me and someone who's always trying to engage and connect, like I feel like it gets put further and further.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. So I mean, like I have visions of used to live in Austin. I don't know if he still does. Ernest Cline with Ready Player One.
Yeah.
Like, are we going to become that? Well, like if we want to get together, you know, at like 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night, and we only have a few, not much. Put on our headsets and find a space.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the worst thing, right? Again, with the ladies group that I have, we started meeting in person before COVID, and when lockdown happened, like. When that monthly meetup popped up on our calendar, we were all like, what are we going to do? We've got to meet. We can't not meet. Like it had already become so imperative that we needed it. And so we started meeting on Zoom, and it was not satisfactory the way an in-person meetup was. But if that's all you can do, it was definitely better than nothing, right? Like we learned that in COVID. To come back to another thing that you and I just did, Santi Gold at Radio East Sunday night. It was just such an incredible show. I love and respect that woman so much as an artist, as a musician. But she's a Gen Xer. She's 51 or 52, and she just has this, like, I think one of the reasons she's one of my favorite artists is she has, like, so many of those influences baked into her music.
Absolutely.
And you can just see the, like, you know, the punk rock skater girl, like,
100%.
you know, and all of those things. And just kind of, and I know from knowing her story some, like, she's got those friends from really early on. Like, she's stuck with people from the early days that have become a part of her community and become a part of her art, and like stayed with her. So beyond that, like that was the best show, and I had so much fun dancing, but I ran into so many people. Like it wasn't ACL, it wasn't South by, it was just a Sunday night show on the East Side, and suddenly I saw 20 people and people I haven't seen in forever. And so for me, part of that was like, oh, is this something we could do? But it's not regular enough, and it's expensive, and like, but it's something we all love and like we grew up with, or I shouldn't say we all, but a lot of us, a lot of my friends were from that club, and we all related on music. So I don't know what the answer is, but that felt really good. Finding things like that.
And what I loved about that whole experience was that it wasn't really a retro artist that was doing some sort of reunion tour. Because there's a lot of that. And some of those I'm like, I don't know. But Santi Gold,
she's active. She's vibrant. She just put out a new album not too long ago, which is brilliant.
Absolutely. So I have a lot of respect for our peers who are still actively creating and putting themselves out there, because it's very easy to just not. And I know a lot of us did that during the pandemic. It threw a lot of us into a huge funk.
Oh,
right?
for sure.
But
for many good reasons.
Yeah. Completely understandable.
Yeah.
But it takes a few of us movers and shakers who are like, look, this is not just for you, this is for me too.
Yeah.
I want
this
your
is
presence.
for us.
Yeah,
this is for us. This is for everyone. And we need more of that. We need more of that. This is for us to kind of combat where we're at in the not to get political, but in the present moment, I think there's a lot of me and I, and there needs to be a lot more us because the baby boomers are huge. That's a huge generation, right? That the smaller generations are going to have to take care of. We need more us thinking,
right?
And just in general, all the big social problems. We need more us thinking in general for all of these things. So finding that solution.
I think as long as we are at least acknowledging this and putting it out there, I think a lot of things will start happening. Will start unfolding. The thing that I guess what had always been sort of my kind of philosophy in that and how I relate to people like yourself and so many others in our circle are people like, at least we should just try it.
Totally.
Just try.
It
might work, it might not.
Yeah.
It's okay if it doesn't.
Yeah.
But I think there's a fear of failure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's okay if it doesn't part, right? That like a lot of people are like, it's not okay.
Yeah. It makes me look bad.
Yeah.
Then what will people say? What will people think?
Yeah. we have one of our life changes that came out of COVID. We have a little 70s ranch style house in North Austin, and the garage was semi-converted. The guy that owned it before us used it as a workshop to repair instruments or whatever. So my husband worked out of this semi-converted garage. It was really hot when it was hot, really cold when it was cold. So we converted it after, in 2021 we converted it. It's like a little studio apartment now. It's finished. It's part of the house. So I work out of there when I work from home, and our thought was this could be our space for our aging parents.
Oh, that's good.
It is good, right? Yeah. But it's not quite like if you build it, they will come. We built it, and our parents have been like, I'm not moving.
Yeah, of course.
I'm not budging, right? And so it was kind of like this. Well, why don't we try it? And so we went through these moments of we failed. We did this thing and it didn't work. My mom will come and she'll stay a week and have her own space, which is brilliant. Yeah. She's not going to move in there anytime soon, right? She's not budging, which I want her to be independent as long as she can.
Yeah.
But we were coming around to, we didn't fail.
Right.
We just pushed out our house and we have this whole new, we used it as an art studio for my youngest son to create all this art that he was working on for his middle school application. We've used it for, gathering space for other things, or when we need that quiet space to work ourselves or whatever. I don't know. I'm just we reframed it and we're we actually succeeded. We just didn't do the thing we thought we were going to do.
Exactly.
Right? And so I feel like we need more of that and with each other.
Right. And I think that's sort of one of the hallmarks and trademarks of our generation.
Yeah.
We know how to adapt really well.
Right.
And shape shift and repurpose things,
In DIY.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
MacGyvering things. With paperclip and tweezers and whatever,
Yeah.
So.
And I think our kids' generation has that. I think we just need to empower it and give them permission more.
Yeah.
They need more time to tinker. They need more time to just do that and figure it out.
Right.
And maybe be alone.
Yeah, I know. So there's the dynamic of over-parenting, the tiger parenting, and under, completely free range. It's it's not safe.
Yeah.
And that's a lesson you can't recover from,
Yes. Yeah, finding that middle ground, which I think I think we've tried to do. I don't fault my parents at all. I think they did the best with what they had and where we were at. But yeah, sometimes I look back on my childhood and just I was alone a lot. My older sister would very introverted, would hide in her room reading, and I would just be wandering the neighborhood looking for friends to play with while my parents were still at work or whatever. Yeah. I mean, I had a very great relationship with them, and I did a lot of things with my parents, but they worked all the time, so there were hours and hours where I was on my own. And so I think with my kids, I tried to overparent, right? And I'm oh, I need to be with you. I need to get you in this activity, or you need to be enriched or whatever. And so
that too, and we're wait a second, let's back off.
Yeah, I'm trying to do the backing up part now and find that middle ground. Our oldest has started doing tennis with some elementary friends. And when the lesson's over, like we just leave him there at the park with the friends for like an extra 2 hours. And there's a parent 4 doors up.
Okay.
Like, they're not, they've all got their phones.
Yeah.
They're not like in danger.
Right.
And the more they build this muscle, the safer they get. Right.
Yeah.
And like, I keep trying to bake that in, like, hey, you're going to hang out with these guys and you're going to look out for each other. If you see them starting to do something dangerous, just pause, like we're trying to bake that in and give him that. And he's ready for it.
Yeah. That's good.
He needs it, and I just remember like I definitely look back on those times by myself as a kid as lonely, but I also look back at it as like, I would bike this whole little island off Key West that we lived on in the military housing. I would bike that whole island by myself with my dog and stop and explore like these little like tide pools and like, I mean, fantastic memories as a kid of just being able to have that freedom and explore and like be on my own and figure it out. And, that fall off my bike and scrape my knee and look around. Nobody's there to take care of me and be like, oh, I guess I'm fine. I can just get back on my bike. Right. Like, things like that just, sometimes I feel like we don't give our kids enough space to figure out. Yeah.
And knowing that, there's always going to be a community to hold you up in case something does, and, we might not have it constantly in your face.
Right.
But in the back of your head that there's a community there,
Yeah, and I try to be very upfront with my kids about that. And sometimes like in our neighborhood we have a giant dog that we walk in our neighborhood. We're very conspicuous, right? Like the neighbors know us because of the giant dog.
Yes.
And so there's like some older couples that my husband and I love chatting with. They've long time Austinites, a lot of good stories and just super sweet. My husband and I love chatting with them. Sometimes the kids get bored and they'll be like, can we run on home? And a lot of times I'll say yes. But one of the times I said, they know a lot and they have really cool stories and one day they'll be gone. I like to hear it. I like to absorb it. That's going to be me someday. I like looking ahead and like learning from the people who are going ahead of me. I just like to point it out to them. It's like, this won't always be here. So sometimes it's okay to run on ahead and go home, but sometimes just stop and listen and like appreciate that community, and like, you never know when someone's going to like hit on something. You're like, whoa, what? What did you do? You did that? Something that's just so important or interesting to you. So I'm also just like, I feel like I like that military kid thing, or maybe just being born who I was. I feel like I've always been this amateur, like anthropologist. Like I'm always like kind of studying people and curious about people and culture and like, how do you work? What are you interested in? What do you do? Who do you hang out with?
And I think that a lot of our generation was like that, just observant, just kind of looking at things, and we might not say much, but we sort of know right away who's full of it and who's not. Just by just a few trademark moves that we make. Like now, or oh man, I could see. Like, I want to talk to this person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I do feel like that's something that our digital kids miss out on. Some of those like in-person context clues.
But you can start getting that more and more with community.
And
I think that's a great sort of theme for this episode.
Amazing.
It's like you're hearing it from two Gen Xers. Community is important.
It's so important.
And if you don't have one, create one. Just like how you held on to your friends. And wherever you go as a military kid, you kind of created your own community.
Exactly.
It's a survival mechanism.
It is. Yeah, I have a coworker who's pregnant now, and we were talking a lot about that. Her family's here, but kind of scattered around the Austin area or whatever, and she was kind of worrying about like, am I going to be by myself with this baby? And I was like, you just be intentional. Tell them. Come over. Come hold the baby. Let me shower. Come hold the baby. I want to hear an adult, So I think like, as a Gen Xer, but also, a parent, a few more years into it, I had so many parents that were a little ahead of me on the path that were just imperative to my life at that point, right? Like it feels like life-saving, saying stuff like that, sleep when the baby sleeps. Like it all sounds like these little like bon mots or whatever that sound great when you're in it, but like you're like, oh yeah, that's true. I definitely should do that. I shouldn't worry about the dishes, right? Like,
right.
And so I try to like do that and like pay it forward. Like, when I'm talking to, parents who are younger in the journey, like, this saved me.
Yes.
Like, just keep this in mind. This may be worthless to you, but I just want to share with you, like, this thing saved me, right? Like, this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the more, to use your word, intentional we are about it, the more it will happen.
Yeah.
The more community we will start creating. That is actually the motto of Austin Parks and Rec.
Yay.
Which is we create communities.
Yeah, we love Austin Parks and Rec. My kids go to Austin Parks and Rec summer camps, and we love our camp counselors and big fans. We love the pools, big fans.
It's a great
Such a great resource.
And run by people who love it, love doing it just as much.
And love Austin.
Yes.
Yeah. So cool.
Well, thank you, Karen.
Yeah, thank you.
Doing this, and thank you all out there for listening.
Thank you.